Hey, all, everybody, and welcome to another full series spoiler breakdown of a Lost Season 1 episode. This week, I'm talking about Walkabout. And if you've listened to the previous two of these that I've done, one on the pilot and then one on Tabula Rasa, then you are aware that I've been doing these as commentaries on the episodes. The idea behind that is that way it doesn't create a massive amount of editing that I have to do. I can kind of just ramble, for better or worse, throughout the length of the episode, and then I'll read off some messages I've gotten after the commentary. But yeah, generally there shouldn't be a lot of editing to these, and that makes it easier to be able to get done every week alongside the other two types of podcast episodes that I've been releasing. Um, so before getting started on the commentary, I want to read a piece of feedback that I got last week from Homo Sapiens 99, who said, "I've really enjoyed the podcast so far, but the upload order feels a bit awkward. If I want to watch along, I now have to watch each episode twice, once in preparation for the spoiler-free podcast, and then once more during these live commentaries." And yeah, I thought that was a fair point. The reason that I like doing these full series spoilers commentaries last is because if somebody in the group discussion or if my co-host on the main episodes of our podcast, if somebody says something in one of those instances that I would like to respond to in a spoilery way, this is the one place I can do that. And so I like saving this until after I've done both of those other two types of episodes. Um, that said, yeah, I think my takeaway from what Homo sapiens said there is that I should do a better job with these of making them work as podcast episodes in and of themselves rather than just as episode commentaries. So, what I'm going to try and do a better job of doing, starting with today's episode, is if I am talking about a specific moment that's on screen as I'm watching this, I will try and do a better job of explaining what it is I'm talking about and giving the full context. That way, nobody has to watch along with me if they don't want to. They can just listen instead. Um, I think that's probably the best way forward. Now, that said, if you want to watch along with me, I will still let you know as I'm pressing play and as the episode is starting. So, right now, I am pressing play, and now Locke's eye is opening. So, yeah, if you're watching along, hopefully you're more or less synced up with me. So, let's see. We're starting with Locke waking up. Yeah, so some of the people, some of our first time viewers, um, kind of caught on to him wiggling his toes here as a sign that he had some kind of paralysis or disability related to his legs prior to crashing. Other people, though, yeah, like he goes and looks over his shoe and they read it the way I think it was meant to be read on first watch, which is he's like, "Oh, where's my shoe?" Like he's kind of in shock. He's like, "Where's my shoe?" And oh, there it is. Um, Again, it's one of those things where I wish I could say what my experience would have been because I already knew by the first time I watched this episode that Locke had been in a wheelchair. So I never got to experience that reveal the way it was intended. But while talking about Locke and him regaining his ability to walk, something that someone has asked me in the past is, you know, basically, as the series goes on, it's eventually revealed that a lot of Locke being quote unquote special, a lot of that was a fabrication. Sorry, a lot of that was a fabrication and manipulation on the part of the Man in Black. Um, but then in this episode, like he does gain his ability to walk again. And so somebody asked me like, okay, so is that something the Man in Black did? Um, or is Locke special in some way? So yeah, so here's my thing. I prefer the interpretation that the Man in Black was not aware of who Locke was at all until he comes face to face with him later in this episode. The reason I prefer that is because I think it adds, on rewatch and just looking back on it, I think it adds more weight to that scene if we come to understand that that's the moment that the Man in Black reads Locke and comes to understand who he is and how easy he would be to manipulate. And then from that point forward, um, the Man in Black's plan regarding Locke, takes shape. Um, so for that reason, I don't like the idea or the interpretation that the Man in Black immediately healed Locke once he arrived on the island. Um, so yeah, so that said, I think that Locke's form. So the way the island energy works, right, is that like this electromagnetism, different people react to it in different ways, and they manifest different abilities. It seems to be based on their physiology, and I don't know, whatever else. Um, so I think that Locke has a unique type of communion with the island that allows him to heal, at least in this instance, at a much more drastic level and rate than most people would heal. Um, but even that in and of itself doesn't make him some divine prophet the way that he's kind of built up in the minds of the others as being, and the way that he himself at times um, likes to believe that he is. Because I mean, like Rose kind of has the same type. Stop. All right, sorry. That's the shitty thing about these commentaries. I can't exactly edit that out. Go lay down. Normally, I record these at night, and my dogs are like passed out in bed. Now the wind blew outside too hard, and it set them off. So sorry about that. What I was saying though is that Rose um, has the same type of thing happen to her. I mean, we don't know for a fact that it was an instant um, healing of her, curing of her cancer. Um, I'm struggling to remember the exact way she described it to Bernard in the SOS episode, but it sounds like, from what I remember, it sounds like it pretty much right away when she got there, she could feel that she was better. So yeah, to me, it seems like Locke is no more qualified as some special leader than Rose would be, for example. So in a lot of ways, that arc of you know Locke only believing that he's so special, and the others believing that he's so special, all being a manipulation of this darker entity. All of that still holds up in my mind, even while acknowledging that yes, Locke does have a very specific type of communion with the island upon immediately arriving on it. And yeah, I do think that we see that manifest in some other ways too. Like he later in the season, he's able to sense when the weather, um, is about to change and things like that. I do think that Locke has a genuine type of communion with the island, the way that other characters do, the way that a lot of other characters do. So that's what I'm saying. He's not even that special in that regard, but I also think the Man in Black is able to interfere with that connection, like the Man in Black's own much more powerful connection to the island and its energy, and it enables him to kind of block or mess with or interfere with other people's communion to it. So like later in the season, when Locke starts to lose his ability to walk, I do think that the Man in Black is telepathically doing that, because Locke is kind of susceptible to it, and yeah, and then once once what the Man in Black wanted to happen, which was Boone falling, he stops interfering and allows um, Locke's communion with the island to return, and therefore his ability to walk returns. Um, okay, sorry. And then, yeah, that was something else I had in my notes regarding that question in the rows of it all. Is that I do wonder if the others had known of Rose's terminal cancer and that being instantly healed, maybe they would have potentially been about as excited about her being a potential leader. Like maybe they would have read into that as something like extra miraculous and some kind of sign that she has a divine connection to the island. Um, oh yeah, also another thing in the note is that in season 3, Ben wants to keep Locke around for a while he's recovering from his surgery because he believes that just being in close proximity to Locke will help heal him and help get him out of his own wheelchair. Um, and the fact that does indeed happen, like Ben fully admits that it was once like he couldn't wiggle his toes, and then once Locke shows up, he started to feel pins and needles again. And then within about a week, I think, Ben's able to stand and walk, with the cane. Um, so that too kind of confirms that yes, John does have some type of connection to the island's energy, and is able to harness and manifest it in that way. So yeah, now we're coming to the first flashback scene where Locke is in the office. And there was something that I noticed in our group screening of this episode that I don't remember ever noticing before. Yeah, right here. Um, well, see, and now I'm second guessing it. So basically, uh, like in his cubicle there, John's sitting at his computer in a chair where and his jacket is covering the back of the chair so that you can't see that it's a wheelchair. Um, and then what I had thought I noticed in the screening is that an office chair is pushed off to the side, which was kind of maybe a clue to the fact that Locke isn't like what Locke is sitting in isn't something besides his office chair. Um, the reason that I am now second guessing that observation is because this time watching it, I see that that computer chair that I thought was pushed to the side is in front of its own computer terminal. So that almost makes it seem like he's sharing that cubicle with someone who's not there. Um, so I don't know. I don't know if that was meant to be a clue um, to what was going on with Flocko or not, but it was something that I don't remember ever taking note of before. So that's another good example that of how no matter how many times I've seen this show, I continue to notice new things. Um, so here we have the scene where Michael asks Son to watch his son. Um, and something I kind of want to do with this, and we'll see how often I remember to do it, but the times that people are speaking other languages and they're not subtitled, I find it interesting to kind of look up what they actually said. And so in this scene, Michael's trying to ask her to watch him and explain that he's going hunting, and the first thing she says is, according to Google Translate, Ah, I will take good care of your son. Yes. Um, and then after Michael leaves, son turns to Walt and says something which is apparently translated to, "Don't worry too much. Your dad will be okay." And that's when Walt says, "Yeah, whatever." So now we have the scene where Claire is coming to Jack with the idea of reading the names for the memorial service, and Jack is like not at all wanting to be part of that. Um, which I do think part of that is him trying to um, distance himself from this leadership role that people seem to be thrusting upon him. And obviously, the next episode explores that quite a bit. But I also think that once we find out that he was on his way to his dad's funeral when the plane crashed, I think that might. I think that also recontextualizes this a bit. Um, why he has such an aversion to being part of this memorial service when he hasn't been able to put his dad to rest, and he was dreading that, but he was also trying to get it over with, and now he can't do that. Um, so yeah, I think all of that in a cool way recontextualizes why he's not interested in being part of the memorial service, and why at the end of the episode he's sitting alone um, on the beach instead of being present for it. So yeah, now we're at the scene where Boone is talking to Shannon about Rose sitting by herself on the beach, and we see Rose for the first time, sitting there clinging to her husband's wedding ring. And as I talked about with Julia in our virtual interview for the group discussion episode, um, my read on what she's doing there is she's kind of meditating, I guess, on like her sense that Bernard is still alive, and her trying to sort that out. I think, um, and then it's only at the end when she gets up with Jack that she's kind of reckoned with that and come to a firm conclusion about it. Um, and I think that you could read into that the more parapsychological aspect of the abilities people manifest on this island. Um, you could read it as that kind of everyday phenomenon that people talk about of people sensing whether or not a loved one has passed, and the question of how accurate that is, or how often that's accurate versus how often it's not. Um, yeah, you could just read that as her just having faith in that being real versus her being in denial. Or you could read it as she has some parapsychological intuition about the fact that he's alive now that she's on this island, and as we find out later, she does have um, a deep a deeper level of connection to it, given that she was healed. So another thing I said to Julia was that I find it interesting that this is really the one instance so far that Boone hasn't tried to. take on this role. Like he's kind of deferred to Jack. Like, hey, maybe you should go talk to her instead of Boone trying to do it himself. Um, I feel like there's a good interpretation of why that might be. That's kind of eluding me. I feel like maybe I don't know because like normally Boone doesn't seem to be willing or able to acknowledge his shortcomings or his lack of qualifications. Um, but in this more like therapeutic, um, like psychologically therapeutic way, um, he he does seem to realize that he doesn't know how to help. Um, yeah, so I just find that interesting, I guess. But my moving my mic because I feel like you can probably hear the hum of that, and I don't know how much I'll be able to get rid of it in the edit. Yeah, so Kate getting that injury there. I think I talked about this in the pilot, but the way this show does such a good job, like with the consistency of people's injuries and the rate at which they heal. Um, yeah, like the makeup that they have to keep track of and apply every single episode, day after day. Um, and yeah, keep track of. Yeah, it's just very impressive to me. I think Ben Ward, whose comment I'm going to read after the end of this episode. Um, one of the parts that I may not read out loud, but one of them kind of one part of his comment was talking about that type of thing. And yeah, I am also impressed by it. Spiritual renewal, where one derives strength from the earth. Yeah, that's what Locke is saying to Randy in this scene, and yeah, obviously, very much fits with what happens to him on the island. Um, in the more obvious, in the more immediately obvious ways, but then as we come to understand the island better, it's a very accurate description of how that works in the world of the show. It's kind of like what Isaac explains to Rose in season two. Um, Yeah, so this is the scene as Locke is laying there after the boar charged him. And he looks at his foot, and it's the same shot from the beginning of the episode after the crash. Um, so yeah, I think it showed that shot before it went to the flashback, and now it's showing it again after it comes out. That's the part when I'm watching it with other people that I get like the most nervous that they're going to figure it out because, like I said, it kind of makes sense at the beginning of the episode because he's in shock and he's like looking for his shoe. But when it shows it again here, it's almost like, okay, why is he looking at his leg like that? Like, is he not able to move his leg? Why would he not be able to move his leg? Um, yeah, so I get nervous when that part happens when I'm watching with new people. But most of the time, yeah, like it people don't catch on to it. It's one of those things that's funny where when you know the twist, like things seem so obvious, but generally speaking, they actually aren't. I guess I can kind of like skip ahead here too, because again, if the idea is that I'm trying to make this so that you guys don't have to watch it along with me, then I suppose if I don't have anything to say about the scene on screen, I can go ahead and talk about things that um, are coming later. Uh, so I think real quick, I wanted to talk about um, when Jack first sees his father, the image of his father. Um, well, so yeah, not the first time, but the second time in this episode, you can see the white shoes, the white tennis shoes that he's wearing, and obviously that goes into the next episode. I think that's a pretty, um, it's a nice little clue because you went like, why the hell would he be wearing white tennis shoes with the suit, like, whoever this guy is. And then in the next episode, when you come to understand it's his dad, you're still wondering why he's in a suit with white tennis shoes, and it's really kind of a clever clue that like, okay, why what is the one situation that I can think of, anyways, that you would have somebody in a suit but not wearing dress shoes? Um, and yeah, it would be a situation where you don't see their feet, and that would be in the case of a wake. You'd have the top part open, and the bottom part closed, and therefore you'd have them in a suit, but it wouldn't really matter what kind of shoes you put on them. So yeah, even though that's not explicitly explained until like season five, it was kind of a clever clue as to the fact that who Jack was seeing was someone that should in fact be dead. Um, Yeah, so I've talked in the other podcast episodes about this phone conversation. Everybody had something to say about this. Um, the reveal of who Helen actually was to John. Um, of course, that it gets more interesting when you find out that his significant other, his almost fiance, a few years prior to this, maybe like five-ish years before this, um, was named Helen, and so it's just interesting to think about, like, whenever he first called this number, like, did he ask for a Helen? Was it a coincidence that the lady that answered was named Helen, and therefore that was why he kind of formed this attachment to her, and read into things that projected this connection there that wasn't actually there. Um, yeah, I can see that being the case. I would say him living the life that he's living for these past 4 years has made him insanely lonely, and so that would make sense why you call the number. But yeah, as far as like whether or not he asked for a Helen or that just happened, is open to interpretation, obviously. And then, yeah, here's the scene where Michael says, I thought the guy with the gimpy leg should be deciding when we stop." Um, which, again, that's one of those things. I don't think I've ever gotten the joke there that, in the context of what Locke's condition is, like, it's, yeah, Locke, Kate decides that they need to stop and go back. She needs to take Michael back. But Locke's like, no, I'm going to keep going. And so that adds humor to Michael's line of, well, I think the guy with the gimpy leg should be deciding when we stop. Yeah. So another example of something that no matter how many times I've seen the show, still discovering new things. It's interesting to me because obviously I'm watching this muted and I have the subtitles on. I'm finding it interesting that here where Kate's in the tree and she starts to hear the monster, it doesn't subtitle the fact that you're hearing the monster, which I find weird. Now Locke's about to encounter it. Yeah, it doesn't subtitle the boar. It doesn't subtitle the monster. Not sure why that would be. Maybe there's a different track that's for specifically for like the hearing disabled or whatever. Um, but yeah, so here's the moment. The monster's coming face to face with Locke, and vice versa. And that's something that's often questioned is what exactly did Locke see here? Because in season 3 he tells Echo that he saw a bright light. Um, and yeah, I mean it's open to subjective interpretation, and I don't think that there's a right or wrong answer, and I don't have a particularly strong opinion on what exactly it was that he saw. I don't think it matters all that much. I think it could be as simple as the monster was reading Locke, and therefore those flashes were happening, and maybe that's what Locke saw as a bright light. He sees this cloud of darkness, and he sees this bright light coming from it, and him projecting this spiritual, like, the words eluding me, but projecting this as this benevolent thing that is the source of this miracle that's happened to him. Yeah, I could see him reading that as the bright light, or yeah, maybe it manifested or mentally projected some kind of image, along the lines of the source. Because I know that's a theory a lot of people have, is that when Locke describes seeing a beautiful bright light, that does kind of sound like what we see the Source depicted as at the end of the series. Um, Again, I don't have a strong opinion on that. I don't think it particularly matters which interpretation of that you have. The point is that Locke interprets this encounter as beautiful and meaningful in a positive way, um, when in reality that is not the case. Oh, and then yeah, as far as so my uncle said that he heard, like he understood that the monster killed the boar. Um, but a lot of the other people that I've talked to among the first time viewers didn't catch that, and I know I didn't catch it for a long time. So it does almost make me like question, like does do other people have a different interpretation of that? Um, this time I'm obviously watching it with the subtitles on, but like I am like very very confident that you can explicitly hear that boar being killed prior to the monster emerging. Um, Again, I think it suggests, what I think when you come to understand what the monster is and what it has been trying to do with Locke over, the many seasons of the show, I think I think the monster killing the boar and letting Locke have it fits perfectly with its manipulation of him. It wants him, it can read what his thoughts and interpretation of this island. It can read all of that in Locke in that moment, and then it could probably assume, read, or predict that Locke that if the monster simply gives Locke this gift of the boar, that Locke will then transfer uh, his interpretation of the island onto the monster itself, and from there, um, the monster can continue to grow Locke's faith in the quote unquote island and his interpretation of it, and by extension, the monster can exploit that. Yes, this is something I talked about. I think I cut it out of the group discussion because the audio was kind of shitty, and also I try to cut out like some of what I'm saying in those discussions because it's supposed to be, um, the first timer's perspective. But this scene right here with Saeed, sorry, yeah, for the people not watching along, Kate brings back the device Saeed gave her and tells him that she dropped it and it's broken, and he gets angry about it for a second. And she tries to comfort him and reassure him, like, "Look, we're gonna try again." And she even like holds his hand there for a minute. He's like, "Yeah, we'll try again." And then Jack comes up, and there's kind of this awkward moment, and Saeed's like, "Excuse me," and like he excuses himself and he walks off. Um, but kind of, yeah, like I said, just awkwardly. Um, that feels to me, that and a few other things in upcoming episodes does make me feel like the writers were trying to maybe uh, hint at or explore. I think maybe they were trying to test the waters for a potential love triangle between Jack, Kate, and Saeed. I think that was something they were kind of testing the waters for. But then, um, obviously, they don't go down that road, and I think that's because they realized that Kate and Sawyer had more chemistry, and I think that they obviously went down that road instead. But yeah, that's something that like the first few times I watched this, I never picked up on, but now it kind of sticks out to me quite a bit that they were that a potential romance between Kate and Saeed seemed to be getting hinted at. something that I kind of skipped past because I was talking about something else is Rose talking about the tail section when she's talking about her husband. I just think it's a really cool that this early on that they kind of give you that hint of like, hey, this might be relevant later. Like, don't write that tail section off. And then, yeah, I can't speak for other people's experience with the show. Well, so I mean, that's the thing, right? Is like Ana Lucia showing up in the flashback, in Jack's flashback in the season 1 finale. I think that pretty heavily, and her being such a big actress, um, back then on the show, like for her to just show up for that one little cameo would have been weird. So I do feel like most people probably understood that the tail section was probably going to come into play in season 2, at least by the point of the season 1 finale. Again, the way I watched the show was I was introduced to it in the middle of season 1, and then fell off of it, and then it was at the start of season 2. I watched the season 1 recap, and then the season 2 premiere, and that was kind of how I fully got into the show and started watching it regularly. Can't say that word. So my point with that was I don't really remember how surprised I was about the tail section thing, because I think even in the recap it showed that Jack had met Ana Lucia and that she was in the tail section. But the point is that I didn't have the season 1 experience to even like think about whether or not the tail section was around or would show up. I just now noticed that this Australian tour guide, like the Walkabout guide dude, I just now noticed his name tag says his name's Rick Romer. Like Romer, like it's not spelled like that, but I mean Romer, like as in roaming around. Walkabout, get it? uh, yeah, this is such a cool scene. Again, upset that I never had the jaw dropping moment, like the experience of seeing this, but which that will transition nicely into the first comment I'm going to read at the end of this, which is from Shokas regarding his experience for seeing this episode. Although, yeah, but before this episode ends and before I get into that, I realize I missed the part where where Michael says, "Hey, good job on catching the boar" to Locke, and Locke's reaction to it. That's another thing that I feel strongly hints at the fact that Locke didn't actually kill the boar himself. Like his kind of, I don't know how to describe it. I think I reenacted it in the group discussion, but yeah, he kind of just like, oh yeah, yeah, thanks. And then yeah, I think I talked to Julie about this scene. Yeah, I think it was one of the things that didn't record at first, and we had to go back and we're trying to talk about again. But yeah, the juxtaposition here in this scene of Locke having this profoundly positive experience in the midst of all this horror happening around him and all these people screaming. It's a great juxtaposition, and it fits so perfectly with Locke and him having a different experience and a different set of feelings about their situation than everybody else. And we are now officially in the credits, so I will do my own credit section real quick before getting into some messages. Thank you to candidate number 90, Ben Ward, Candidate number 108, Jeffrey Winslow. Candidate number 69, Brian Phillips. Candidate number 32, Chuck Boyd. Candidate 341, Hans. And I would also like to thank the multiple people that have donated equipment and resources used in the production of this podcast. These include Mary Mullins, Brandon Huth, Charles Huth, William McMahon, and Charlene McMahon. And if you too would like to become a candidate, you can do so for as little as $1. Even just a one-time donation of that amount will get you added to the candidate wall, which will be displayed in all future video versions of this podcast, as well as any other YouTube videos I make regarding Lost. The other thing that a donation will get you is the type of verbal credit you just heard me read off for as long as you're an active donor. And what that means for a one-time donation is that if you just make one donation and not a regular one, then for the next 30 days, any podcast episode that is released, you will be verbally credited in. But if you do set up a recurring donation, then you will be verbally credited for every episode for so long as you are an active donor. With that out of the way, let's go ahead and get into some fan messages. Like I said, I want to start with a comment that Shokas left. He left this on a post I made on the YouTube community tab. I had basically posted this 18 hours before my co-host and I were going to record our episode, looking for people's recollection of what they first thought when they watched it. Shokas responded to that, but unfortunately it was just past the 18-hour mark, and therefore I was not able to include it in that podcast episode. So I'm going to go ahead and read that here. Regarding the episode Walkabout, he said, "I loved it. I watched it when it aired, which was in February 2005 in my country, since Lost started later here. But by then, the buzz around Lost had really reached overseas, and people kept talking about this new amazing show from the US. When Walkabout began, I was let down at first that Locke wasn't a hitman or working for the government. I thought he would have been someone in the Secret Service or something along those lines. But of course, all of those feelings of disappointment went away with the much better explanation. I remember being so surprised on the wheelchair twist, since it was so unique to twists I had seen before. There was no intense build-up or a revelatory line before it cuts to black. It was just the Australian mate going to the bus, and we see that Locke is in the wheelchair. It was brilliant." Yeah, so that goes back to what I was saying at the end of that commentary there, is that I envy the people like Shokas that actually got to have that experience. The closest thing to it that I get is watching it with new people, and if they react in some kind of visible or audible way, then I get some kind of vicarious high off that, I guess. So yeah, that's cool. Thank you for that, Shokas. Sorry I was not able to include it in the podcast proper. The next comment, I think the only other one, is from Time Gentleman, otherwise known as Ben Ward. "One thing I'd like to hear from you in these episodes is how stuff ties into your overall theories of the mythology. For example, whether you think Walt stops the rain, or, for a slightly sillier theory that I came up with, and I'm not sure has been suggested elsewhere, that the boar chasing Michael is actually the Man in Black. I don't particularly think the latter is true, but I do think it would be a hilariously low-level way for him to rile up conflict. Perhaps if the Michael-son romance had happened, my theory would hold more weight." Well, I just think I don't think that the Michael-son romance never fully, going super far. I don't think that takes away from the idea of it just being an attempt to rile up conflict, because I do think there are plenty of other examples of the Man in Black making attempts to generate conflict that don't necessarily pan out fully. That said, yeah, I don't have a strong opinion I don't think it needs to be the Man in Black. I think that it works as just kind of a foreshadowing of the reveal in the next episode, the one that I just did the commentary on. The reveal that there are Boar on the island. But I don't hate that idea. I don't dislike it. So it's another example of something that I don't have a strong opinion of. Like if somebody wants to believe that or does not want to believe that, I would not try and change their mind. Yeah. Regarding Walt and stopping the rain, it's similar in that I wouldn't try and talk anybody out of their opinion, but in this case, I do have a stronger preference as for whether or not it was a coincidence or not. Um, and yeah, my preference is that Walt actually did stop the rain. The reason I like to interpret it that way is because then it becomes this clue from much earlier on that Walt has these abilities, and that these abilities exist in the world of the show. Uh, you could say that it's hinted at in the pilot, because in the pilot we do see Walt reading the comic with the polar bear, and then a little while later the polar bear appears. Um, but yeah, I think this works as another great foreshadowing of that. But yeah, that it doesn't. If there are other people that just want to read it as this kind of funny joke that the show is making, um, and they don't want to read into that anymore, then yeah, I wouldn't try and convince them that they're wrong for feeling that way. Um, and yeah, as far as Ben's overall point there about wanting me to talk more about how stuff fits into my overall interpretations of the mythology, that is my goal, and that is my intent with these. Um, I don't know why the Walt Rain thing didn't occur to me to talk about. So yeah, there are like that is what I'm looking for as I'm watching these episodes, is things that okay, well, I've talked about this before, and here's how this scene of this episode in particular fits into that. That's what I'm trying to do, but by no means do I think I'm going to be able to perfectly recall or recognize moments that I should be talking about or tying back to things I talked about before. So yeah, please do keep pointing out things like that, like, oh, you didn't talk about this, and then yeah, when I read the comment or the email or whatever, um, I will indeed do that, as I just did. um, Moving on to another part of their comment. There are a couple of things that I find a little cheaty in this episode on the part of the writers. Not plot holes, but red herrings that come on a bit strong. Firstly, that shot of Locke at the end, which is basically there to say, you thought he was being nice to Walt, but in fact he may have an ulterior motive. But unless you really want to get into the weeds of maybe he's trying to win hearts and minds already because he knows he's going to have to convince people to stay on the island, or that he can already tell Walt is special and wants to get him on his side, there's nothing to this, and it's pretty much immediately dropped in the next episode. It's a bit cheeky of the writers, I'd say. Yeah, so I largely agree. I think I talked about that recently in one of the conversations with people about the Tabula Rasa episode. I don't remember if it ended up getting cut from one of those episodes or not, but yeah, it does feel like that creepy music put over Locke staring at Michael and Walt at the end of that episode. It does almost feel like maybe it was a network note that, like, hey, things are getting wrapped up too nicely here. Let's have something to keep people interested in coming back next week. So okay, let's end on this creepy note. I mean, I think it works in the sense that it sets up Locke's episode and it gets you wondering about him again. Like, it kind of renews that mysterious aspect of his character, and I think it works as a misdirect. The way that him having all those knives is a misdirect in the Walkabout episode, and then it subverts your expectations. But it's really the point that Ben makes about it coming on too strong, that's the point that I agree with. It kind of goes out of its way to make him seem sinister in a way that he clearly is not at this point. Um, so yeah, I agree. It's not like a huge criticism that I have. Like it's not something that like how dare they or um, that makes me dislike the episode of the show in any way. But yes, I think that is a 100% valid criticism that I do share. But yes, and then moving on to another example that Ben gives. Secondly, Marshall Mars's attitude toward Kate is so extreme here in a way that I think is intended to make us suspect she's a lot more dangerous than she actually is, but is not really justified. When he throttles her, it's like she's a Hannibal Lecter level monster who must be extinguished at all costs. And I don't think he's delirious there or anything. And this isn't really borne out by the end of the show. Yeah, she killed her abusive stepfather, but that's it, really. She accidentally got a friend killed, felt so bad about it she double-crossed some bank robbers, then she broke a guy's heart and harmlessly drugged him, and saved Ray from the wreckage. And basically, the show's final answer for why Mars acts this way is because he's a nasty asshole. Sure, he's been chasing her for years, so maybe he's pissed that he's failing at his job, and maybe he misinterprets her calls to him as taunting him, but we never get the sort of reveal that he mistakenly thinks she killed 10 people in cold blood, or she unwittingly humiliated him and got him demoted at some point story. Fun that they called him Mars, though. Marshall Mars sounds like an 80s TV series, but it also evokes the god of war, suggesting this is just a very angry guy. Yeah, so I think I can kind of counter this a little bit because an example that Ben gives there about so he talks about Mars's hostility towards Kate seeming a bit extreme and unjustified. Um, and an example that Ben gives of something that might have like given that better context is if she had unwittingly humiliated him and gotten him demoted at some point. Um, I think, in my opinion, in the episode What Kate Did in season 2, it shows that Marshall and Kate first meet and he apprehends her, and she ends up getting away from him. She ends up knocking him out of the car when he wrecks the car, um, and escaping with his law enforcement vehicle. So to me, that is the explanation for why he is so obsessed with catching Kate and why he is so hostile towards her. I think that was a huge career humiliation for him, and while we don't know if he got demoted or not, I wouldn't be surprised if he did. But even if he didn't, then yeah, I mean, to me that explains it enough for it to satisfy me. And as far as like him choking her, I do kind of read him as being borderline delirious at that point because Jack, when Jack comes in and pulls him off of her and he starts laying it back down, like the marshal starts to like seize up, like he starts like shaking and trembling, and so I do read that as him being kind of feverish at that point. Um, and I think that makes sense for why he's more hostile towards her in that moment, whereas later he actually wants to talk to her and he's like basically asking her to kill him. Yeah, I think that just in that episode it shows you those two contradictory moments, and I think the feverish state kind of explains that. So yeah, I think that's everything I have. Please come back next week. Next Thursday, I will be releasing another one of these with full series spoilers about the next episode, White Rabbit. Until then, namaste and good luck.